Everybody, welcome to the video. It's Friday, April 16th, and we're breaking down this monstrous 14-game slate that we have over on DraftKings, and it all starts at night, which is my favorite way for slates to go, because I hate when it starts so early in the day, because it feels like you're just rushing everything, so I like having pretty much the entire day to get my thoughts together and break down an entire slate, but I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you guys are as well. We got aces on the mound. We got the Mets in Coors Field, and there's a lot of good spots for bats, so it should be a fun one. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And if you want help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. If you want the projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, the stacks tool, the Discord community, all that fun stuff. You have several hundred people over there, so if you want to check it out, link is down below. You can follow me over on social media, and the handle's in the bottom right corner of your screen. But I think that's it for the shameless plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we'll start with the pitchers, and hopefully the pitching tonight goes a lot better than it did for me yesterday, because I had Rich Hill and Patrick Corbin as my main pitchers on most of my lineups, and I think we know how that went. I think they combined for around negative 18 fantasy points. I didn't expect too much from my pitchers, but I figured they could get you around 15 to 18 points, and they would be fine relative to the slate because there just wasn't any good pitching options. Boy, was I wrong. Rich Hill, he didn't get shellacked, but he didn't really do anything either. So he had, 0.8 points. I think that's what he finished with, which is pretty good compared to Patrick Corbin. It was like he was pitching batting practice. I feel like every time I was watching that game on the MLB app, because I didn't have the chance to actually watch it on TV, so I'm not sure how bad it looked live. But on the MLB app, every single time there was just another guy on base. He was walking in guys. He was hitting people to get runs scored as well. I mean, he was just absolutely horrendous, and the icing on top was that he gave up that grand slam to Young, which I was like, are you kidding me? I was figuring, you know what, it could be an easy out there, gets out of the inning, he still only has 4 runs given up, could maybe cruise 4 or 5 innings after that, get a handful of strikeouts, not the worst thing in the world. Nope, grand slam, 10 runs given up. It was an absolutely awful day. Then they left him in to get a hit, and then they took him out. I figured we might get a couple more innings, maybe he could get closer to hitting close to 0 points. No, they just took him out, which I totally understand because he was horrendous last night, but hopefully tonight I can go a little bit better, and I think it can. I think we have some better options today, but anyway, we'll start with our 2 aces up top, and then we'll get into the SP2s. But we have Jacob Degrom, $11,000. He got rained out yesterday, so he's now going to be starting in Coors Field, which is never a fun thing for pitchers, but when we have an elite level talent like Jacob Degrom, I will still be interested in them, even if they are in Coors Field, because the Rockies are going to have to at least hit them first to get the ball out of the park and use that thin air in Denver to make that work for homers and things like that. And I'm going to have a hard time seeing the Rockies square up Jacob Degrom here. He just struck out 14 in his last start. He's got a strikeout prop of 9 over in Vegas. I think we could easily see that go above 10 in this game because this Rockies lineup is not very good. Outside of Charlie Blackmon and Trevor Story, it's like, who are you scared of? I mean, Tapia is okay. There's a couple of okay bats there, but Jacob Degrom can mow down any single lineup, arguably the best pitcher in baseball. Elite numbers every single year. The only problem with him is, I mentioned this in my last video, is that the Mets do not score runs for him to get him wins. So you always miss out on that 4-point bonus. But now that we're in Coors Field and they're going up against Chichi Gonzalez, I would be very, very surprised if Jacob Degrom does not pick up a win today. So I realize he is super, super expensive, but the bats today aren't that expensive. There's a couple of expensive bats, obviously, like we have every day, but there's some good value bats out there in good spots as well. So it shouldn't be too hard to fit in Jacob Degrom here. So he's my SP1 on the entire slate. Just looking at his numbers from last season, 39% K rate, doesn't really walk guys, doesn't give up much power, lots of ground balls, doesn't give up really much hard contact, less than 1 home run per 9 innings. I realize pitching in Coors Field is never a fun thing to do, and there's no Vegas line out yet, but if I had to guess, I would assume the Rockies are either slightly below 3 or around like the low 3s, because they're gonna get the Mets bullpen at some point. I don't think Jacob Degrom's gonna go 9 innings here. If he goes 7 to 8, maybe they can get a run or 2 off of a bullpen guy, but I mean, still, it shouldn't be anything too crazy here. So I love Jacob Degrom. Don't really care that he's in Coors Field. Should be able to pitch just fine. We've seen Trevor Bauer have a good start in Coors Field this season, and Jacob Degrom, I would say, is a bit of an upgrade to Trevor Bauer. No disrespect to Bauer. Trevor Bauer is one of the best pitchers in baseball, but Jacob Degrom has just been so consistently good for several seasons now. The guy's absolutely elite, so love Jacob Degrom today. Then dropping down to Max Scherzer. If you need to save a little bit of money, I totally get that if you're scared of Coors Field, because it's not a pitcher's paradise by any means, but it's still Jacob Degrom, so I'm not that concerned, but I get it if you are. So if you want to drop down to Max Scherzer, it should be a good matchup here versus the Diamondbacks. I know they went absolutely off last night, but Max Scherzer, greater than signed Patrick Corbin. I think we all know that. He's still a pitcher that can have around a 30% K rate, has a strong xFIP every season, doesn't really walk too many guys. The one bugaboo with Max Scherzer is that he will give up some lefty power, but this is just not that great of a lineup, especially without Ketel Marte in the lineup. So don't let last night scare you too much with Max Scherzer here. The Diamondbacks really aren't that great of a team, even though they absolutely killed Patrick Corbin last night. But that was just one of those instances where a pitcher who didn't have a great season last year was completely off that night and just got absolutely shelled. But only a 3.57 implied team total here for the D-backs. Max Scherzer is a pretty heavy favorite. I do like the Nationals offense tonight. I think they're in a pretty good spot, so would be surprised if he doesn't pick up a win here. 8 strikeout prop over in Vegas. He was sitting at around a 31% K rate last season with a 3.5 xFIP. He's been okay to start the year. Kind of tough matchup so far versus Atlanta and the Dodgers. Hasn't really been striking out too many guys, but I wouldn't be surprised if Scherzer has his best strikeout game of the year and his best fantasy point game of the year as well. So if you need to save a little bit of money off Jacob Degrom or you just got a course field, I think Scherzer is just fine. You can play both these guys. It's actually not too hard. I don't typically like to go above $20,000 on my pitchers, but I think you could make that work today if you want to. And then getting down to the SP2s, we have Frankie Montas, $7,300 going up against that soft matchup versus Detroit in a pitcher's park in Oakland. And Detroit's been actually playing pretty well. They even put up, I think, like 4 or 5 runs last night, although I do believe Sean Manaea had a pretty solid game. I had to go to bed early last night just to get up and record this video early on because it's 14 games, so I think I missed the end of that game. I know the A's had around 10 runs, but I think the Tigers came alive a little bit late and I was scoring 4 or 5 runs, but still like righties versus Detroit here. Nomar Mazara is not going to be playing in this game. He's on the IL. I think is it the oblique, I think? Either way, it doesn't really matter. He is not going to be playing, which does get rid of some lefty power, which could give Frankie Montas some trouble. So do like him here. I think he's a pretty solid play. Only a 3.64 implied team total against him. Pretty heavy favorite. 5.5 strikeout prop over in Vegas. Numbers last year aren't super impressive, and especially when you compare him to guys like Max Scherzer or Jacob Degrom, you're going to see some red bars here because that's obviously what you'd expect because he certainly doesn't put up their, he's certainly not going to put up their kind of numbers, but a 4.36 xFIP, which was much better than his 5.6 ERA, 25% K rate, can walk some guys, but give up less than a 200 ISO, and we typically like righties versus Detroit. I mean, for the past couple seasons now, they've been pretty much the worst team in baseball versus right-handed pitchers. I know you have new names in the lineup these days, and they have been playing decently well recently, but I like the price point here. He's going to allow you to spend up for some of those bats in course field if you want to today. And then if you want to save even more money, we have a pretty wild card option here in Andrew Heaney at $6,800. He's going to grade out very well in projections today because of that low price point. He's got strikeout potential, but I'm a little bit concerned here because he's a guy that's really hit or miss. Like his first start of the year, he had -3 points, got kind of shelled versus the White Sox. I think he gave up 7 runs in that game. And his last start versus Toronto, which looks like a pretty tough matchup on paper, they have a good lineup. He struck out 9 and had 32 fantasy points, so he's a very up and down guy. We see that last year as well. He can be on his game, get his strikeouts, but he can give up plenty of power in hard contact as well. And there's some righty smashes in this Minnesota lineup, so I would say be very cautious with Andrew Heaney. I think we're going to see either a very good game or we're going to see a pretty poor to mediocre game here from Andrew Heaney. I know that's not really a hot take. I'm sure most people will say the same thing, but looking at his numbers last year, that's just what it would suggest. He's got a fine 4.1 xFIP for his price point and a 25% K rate, which is nice. If you want to look at some of his splits versus right-handed bats, he's fine versus lefties, but versus righties, he'll give up a 43% fly ball rate, a 45% hard contact rate, ISO above 200, and 1.6 home runs per 9 innings. So guys like Nelson Cruz, some of the other righty smashers in that lineup from Minnesota could certainly give him some trouble, but there are some strikeouts to be had in this lineup. So Andrew Heaney at that price point is going to grade out pretty well for me today because of that price. That being said, I think that's it for the pitchers, so let's move on to the bats. And there's a lot of good bats today, so it's something to definitely look forward to. Per usual, we'll start with the catcher position, move around the diamond, and hit the outfield as well. But we'll start up top with James McCann, $4,100, and you're going to see a common theme here. But if you're on the Mets, I have plenty of interest in you today because they're going up against Chichi Gonzalez, who doesn't really strike out many guys and is going to give you plenty of pitches to hit, and the Rockies bullpen's not that great either. So when the team total comes out for the Mets, I'm assuming it's going to be close to 6, maybe even more. So big fan of all the Mets today. Think they're in the best spot of the slate. They're not overly expensive as well. Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso are pretty expensive, but for the most part, you can get these guys in the mid 4K range. So it's pretty easy to stack up the Mets today, even if you do play a guy like Jacob Degrom or Max Scherzer, or even both. But James McCann, pretty solid hitter, close to a 300 batting average last year, 247 ISO, 143 WRC plus, and some overall pretty strong numbers. And if we want to check out Chichi Gonzalez's splits, it's going to be looking pretty good for the hitters. A 6.86 ERA last season, 18% K rate, double-digit walk rate, 5.61 xFIP, over a 200 ISO given up, close to a 300 batting average, with a 41% hard contact rate. Yeah, the Mets are definitely going to be the top stack on the site. They're not overly expensive as well, so I do like James McCann. Then if you want some punt catchers, we have Alex Avila, $2,700. And what I typically like to do with catchers, if I don't have any like super cheap catchers I love, I just like to take a cheap catcher on a team that I'm going to stack on that day. And the Nationals are going to be one of those teams that I'm looking to stack today versus Taylor Widener, who I don't think is a very good pitcher. They have a team total close to 5 here, and Alex Avila, while his numbers are pretty bad and he'll strike out a ton, he had a 35% K rate last season, he does have some pop versus righties. So if you just want to throw in Alex Avila in your lineup for the cheapness, and if you're stacking up the Nats, it makes sense there. So $2,700, not too bad. And the Blue Jays, I'm not really looking to stack them, but Alejandro Kirk, $2,600. He's a pretty solid hitter. Last year, it's a very small sample size, 25 player appearances, but he had 375 batting average, 14 WOBA, ISO above 200, and a 166 WRC plus. And didn't really strike out much either. And catchers typically strike out quite a bit. So Kirk at $2,600 versus lefty Mike Minor, who will struggle with righties a little bit. I think he does make sense there. Then dropping out of first base, we have Pete Alonso. Very expensive Met, the most expensive one, but if you're stacking them up, it's kind of hard to leave Pete Alonso off the lineup because he should be batting cleanup, and we know he has a ton of power in that bat. So if you're full stacking, you don't have to play Alonso in cash games because of the price point. I mean, you're probably going to go with a cheaper first baseman like a Josh Bell or Matt Olson. That might make more sense in cash games and just play the cheaper Mets in the 4K range there, but if you're playing GPPs, you're going to want to use Pete Alonso because he's got plenty of power versus both lefties and righties. And look, Chichi Gonzalez is just not a very good pitcher. I don't think he's going to last long in that game, and the Rockies bullpen can definitely serve up some runs and home runs as well. So, like all the Mets here, I'm going to sound like a broken record the entire slate breakdown here because there's a lot of Mets here, but I like him quite a bit today. Then Matt Olson, $4,400. I'm pretty sure he went deep last night. Kind of checked out at the late portion of this game, and I'm pretty sure I saw Matt Olson homer. But going up against Jose Urena, who did have a decent start versus the Indians, I think it was like a week ago, but he's a guy that really struggles versus left-handed bats. Looking at his splits last season, it was a pretty small sample size, only 6 innings, but in the past, he's shown these same kind of splits where he's tougher on righties and worse versus lefties. But only 6 innings last year, but he had a 10.8 ERA versus lefties, 10.09 xFIP, only a 2.9% strikeout rate. Didn't really walk guys either, so he's going to give you pitches to hit. 375 ISO, 406 batting average, and just really some horrendous numbers. A very small sample size, so he's obviously not going to be that bad. But Jose Urena is a guy that will struggle versus lefties. So Matt Olson, a guy that's got plenty of power versus right-handed pitching, I think he makes sense. And the Oakland A's, once again, look like a pretty good stack. I feel like I've been stacking Oakland for a week now, but they've been putting up some runs, and they have a team total close to 5 here. It's obviously not a great park for hitting, but still like Matt Olson here in a favorable matchup versus Jose Urena, and the Detroit bullpen is not very good either. Then Josh Bell, $3,600 going up against Widener. I like the Nationals quite a bit here, and he still seems a bit too cheap. He's a great hitter. It's just he was stuck on a terrible Pittsburgh team last year in a pitcher-friendly park as well. So I think this move to the Nationals is going to be a good one for Josh Bell. He had a decent game last night, hitting in a prime spot in the order at this price point, hitting right beside guys like Juan Soto is definitely going to help things as well. So I like Josh Bell quite a bit. At that price point, I do prefer him versus right-handed pitching. Dropping down to second base, we have Jeff McNeil going to be hitting the middle of the order here at only $4,200. I like him quite a bit. He's the guy that's going to hit for a high batting average. Last year, a 311 batting average, 360 well, but not a ton of power in his bat, but only 11% K rate, 142 ISO, and a 383 on base percentage. So Jeff McNeil, I mean, he's pretty much an auto lock for me in cash games because second base isn't that great today. Yeah, we have Jed Lowry, Adam Frazier here. Mcneill Odor's available at second base, but I'm probably going to get to him at third base and spend up in the outfield, first base, and pitcher today, and shortstop as well. So I'm probably going to end up going, mid-range here, and Jeff McNeil just makes the most sense to me because I feel like he's a bit underpriced for a guy in Coors Field. Then Jed Lowry, $4,100. If you're stacking up the A's, I'd probably get to him over McNeil just to try to get different because everyone's going to play McNeil today. He's going to end up being one of the highest owned players in the entire slate. If I had to guess, as of right now, of 8 a.m., but it just makes sense to me. But Lowry, he's been hitting well the past few games, and like he's a switch hitter, so he's going to have the platoon advantage here versus Jose Urena, and I love lefties versus him, so Jed Lowry, he makes sense there. Then Adam Frazier, $3,500. I don't typically like playing Pittsburgh bats too much because it's just a pretty bad offense, and Adrian Hauser's not the worst pitcher in the world, but versus lefties, he's pretty darn bad. I can show you the split. So versus righties, he's not that bad of a pitcher. So he had a 2.83 ERA last season, 2.92 xFIP versus them, 22% K rate, only a 3% walk rate, and an ISO less than 100. But if we look at his splits versus lefties, it gets a lot worse there. Double-digit walk rate, only a 14% K rate, a 6.96 xFIP, and just some overall pretty poor numbers. So if you want to use anybody on the Pirates, target the lefties here. And Adam Frazier should be leading off, and his price point's fine, so I think he's an okay option. But for the most part, I'm probably getting to Jeff McNeil at second base today, which everyone will as well. So if you want to get different, guys like Lowry and Adam Frazier do make sense there. Then going down to third base, I'm more than likely just going to play Mcneill Odor. I'll tell you that right now. But if I am going to spend up here, which I typically spend up at third base, but today looks like a good day to kind of spend down there. But Jose Ramirez, $4,900, playing Great American Small Park here in Cincinnati, going up against Jeff Hoffman, who had a good start to the season. In his second start, not so much. He used to be a relief pitcher on the Colorado Rockies, and he typically wasn't that great of a pitcher. So I definitely think Jose Ramirez and some of these Indians lefties, even the righties as well, are certainly in play here. But Jose Ramirez is a guy I typically prefer versus lefties, but he can hit righties just fine. His numbers last season were great: 315 ISO, 415 WOBA, 292 batting average. Doesn't really strike out too much. Has a high fly ball rate. So playing in that park in Cincinnati, I think he's definitely going to be viable today. Yo Moncada, $4,600. Playing in Boston, so it's going to be a hitter-friendly park here. Nick Pivetta is a pitcher that has upside some nights, but he can give up some power as well and get a bit wild and walk some guys. So Moncada, I think he makes sense batting cleanup here. The White Sox aren't the worst contrarian stack in the world. I don't have many White Sox listed, but I think you could stack them up in tournaments, but not one of my favorite stacks today. But Moncada's got plenty of power versus right-handed pitching. Then Rougned Odor, $2,900. He's just a cheap Yankees bat. We know they got plenty of power. They're playing in Yankee Stadium, so it's definitely an upgrade from the Trop here. Michael Wacha, while he's not the worst pitcher in the world, he's pretty average for the most part, and he can become below average in some starts. So I think the Yankees are in a decent spot here. But Odor, below $3,000 on a really good lineup, I think he just makes sense because he does have some power upside, and it is a hitter-friendly park to lefties. And then going down to shortstop, this is 100% going to be a spend-up position for me today because there's a lot of good options here, and I'm going to be spending down more than likely at either the catcher position, second base. There's always some cheap outfielders we can use, and like I think I already mentioned second base, and then Rougned Odor is at third base as well. So shortstop, outfield, looking like some pretty good spend-up options today. But Trey Turner, $5,800 if you're stacking the Nationals. It's going to be as simple as this. If you're stacking the Nationals, go with Trey Turner. If you're stacking the Mets, go with Frankie Lindor. If you need a one-off, or if you just have some Reds in your lineup versus Logan Allen at Great American Small Park, you can use Eugenio Suarez, who's got plenty of power versus lefties. But we'll start with Trey Turner. He's very expensive here, the most expensive shortstop on the slate, but the Nationals are in a pretty good spot here, and they kind of got overshadowed last night by the Diamondbacks, but the offense still had a pretty decent game. I think they scored, 6 or 7 runs in that game, which is typically something you'd be pretty happy with. Now, a lot of the production came from the bottom half of the order, unfortunately, so that kind of hurt things a little bit if you stacked like the 1 through 5 or the 1 through 4 or whatever you did. But I think they can have another good night here. And Trey Turner's got power, he's got speed, and he can hit for a high batting average. Doesn't really strike out too much. So like Trey Turner, especially with always, he has that stolen base upside, which does give you a nice added bonus and a floor. Frankie Lindor, $5,400. He hasn't had that great of a start to the season, but his last game we did score 12 fantasy points, which I believe is his best game of the year. But he's been pretty bad so far. And as an Indians fan, I'm a little bit indifferent on how I feel about Lindor. I wish he was still on the Indians. I realize you got to go get the money, so I understand going to the New York Mets, but it just hurts a little bit that he's gone. Hurts a little bit, but I can certainly play him here in Coors Field. $5,400, hitting in a prime spot in the order, and I think the Mets are the top stack on the entire slate. And trust me, that's not a contrarian take or anything. Everyone's going to have the same idea, but a little bit expensive here. Like Pete Alonso, he's one of the more expensive Mets players on the slate, but if you're stacking the Mets, hard to leave off Francisco Lindor. I believe this is the first time he'll be in Coors Field because the Indians haven't played in Coors Field since, I believe, 2008. So we'll see if he likes the Rocky Mountains here. But definitely like Frankie Lindor today. The Eugenio Suarez, $5,100. He will strike out quite a bit, but Logan Allen's a pitcher that doesn't really get me too scared. He's pretty average for the most part, and he's like the only Indians lefty they've had in quite some time. But I mean, he has plenty of power versus both lefties and righties. So Eugenio Suarez, I think he's a fine play if you want to get some Reds in your lineup, or if you just have $5,100 left at the shortstop position. I mean, I think he's a fine option. I think Bo Bichette's below $5,100, so if you want to use him, he's fine as well versus Mike Minor. Then dropping down to the outfield, if you want to spend all the way up, we have Juan Soto, $6,000, one of the best players in all of baseball. Has insanely elite numbers since last season. 351 batting average, 478 WOBA, 344 ISO, WRC plus above 200. And just some of the best numbers, man. 20% walk rate, 14% K rate. That's an elite ratio. Elite ratio there. So definitely like Juan Soto here versus Tyler Widener. Not a pitcher I would get too scared of. They have one of the best implied team totals on the slate currently at 5. So you can definitely get behind Soto, but if you are stacking the Nationals, it can get pretty pricey quick when you roster Trey Turner and Juan Soto. But fortunately, a guy like Josh Bell can help relieve those prices. Kyle Schwarber's not super expensive as well. We have some fine value plays today, so it shouldn't be too hard to stack up the Nationals. Nick Castellanos, $5,500. He's always had really good power versus left-handed pitching. Looking at his numbers last season versus lefties, he had a 255 ISO, 490 slugging, strikeout rate below 20%. Doesn't really walk much, so he's going to swing quite a bit. But overall, just a nice power righty here versus Logan Allen and a great park for hitting. Really have much interest in the Texas bats. You could look at a guy like David Dahl as well, but Joey Gallo's got plenty of power versus right-handed pitching. Jorge Lopez, just not that great of a pitcher. The Orioles bullpen doesn't really scare me too much either. I wish they were playing in Baltimore, but I still think Gallo is fine for that price point. Then a couple of Mets bats here, Michael Conforto and Brandon Nimmo. And it's as simple as this: the lefties versus the righty, and Chichi Gonzalez, who's not a great pitcher, you want to look at his splits versus left-handed pitching last season, or I'm sorry, versus left-handed bats, he had a 5.44 xFIP, 13% K rate, double-digit walk rate, and just some overall pretty poor numbers. So guys like Conforto and Brandon Nimmo are in pretty elite spots here. I wish Michael Conforto was hitting higher in the order, but he still has fine splits versus righties last year, a 344 batting average, 414 WOBA, ISO close to 200. Pretty similar numbers for Brandon Nimmo, although he did show more power versus right-handed pitching last year, but both are elite plays. Brandon Nimmo probably would end up being a core play for me, especially leading off in Coors Field at $4,100. I feel like he is massively underpriced, so I mean, I would probably be interested in Nimmo if he was close to $5,000. So $4,100 is definitely a steal in my opinion. And Corey Dickerson, $2,900. He's looking like an elite value play here. Going up against Anthony DeSclafani. The Miami Marlins have been kind of hot recently. Now, unfortunately, they're going back to Miami, so they're no longer in Atlanta. So it's definitely a park downgrade here for the Marlins. But Anthony DeSclafani, he's a fine pitcher, but he always struggles versus lefties compared to the righties. Versus righties, pretty rock solid. Versus lefties, he'll struggle quite a bit. And Corey Dickerson leading off, he's always had some fine splits versus right-handed pitching, so I think he makes sense for that price point. Does great as one of the best value bats on the entire slate for me. So guys, I think that's going to be it for the video, so I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell, you know, all the YouTube shenanigans. If you want to follow me over on social media, you know, it's in the bottom corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that if you want to join the community, Discord chat, cheat sheets, projections, ownership projections, rankings, data sheets, all that fun stuff. Link is down below, but that'll be it. Hope you guys enjoy the start to your weekend. Happy Friday, and I'll see you guys in the next video.